Rose had always been the dependable one, the yes person everyone turned to in their times of need. She was the friend who answered every call, the daughter who smoothed every family conflict, and the coworker who cleaned up every last-minute mess. People called her selfless and reliable, and she basked in their approval. Yet, beneath her warm exterior, Rose often felt a quiet desperation. How had her life become a constant performance? By morning, Rose's alarm shattered the silence at 6:30 a.m., pulling her from a restless sleep. She groaned, her body heavy with exhaustion. Another day, another endless list of things to do, for everyone but herself. Throwing on her favorite pastel blouse, she grabbed a granola bar, skipping breakfast for the third day in a row. As she stepped outside, her phone buzzed. "Rose, can you help me pick up a birthday gift for Sarah after work?" Amanda's text popped up. Rose paused, her mind racing. Could she squeeze it in? Her mental checklist loomed. Prepare slides for tomorrow's meeting. Drop off her younger cousin's college application forms at the post office. Bake cookies for the neighborhood fundraiser. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard. Should she say no? Should she explain how overwhelmed she felt? The idea filled her with dread. Of course. Happy to help, she replied, slipping her phone back into her pocket. She felt the familiar tug of unease. Would Amanda even notice how much Rose had sacrificed to say yes? Rose arrived at the office, sat hunched at her desk, drowning in paperwork. By midday the office buzzed with activity, but she barely noticed the chaos around her. Her boss, Mr. Carver, approached with his usual hurried smile. "Rose, I hate to ask this, but can you handle these reports by the end of the day? I wouldn't trust anyone else with this." Rose's stomach twisted. She hadn't eaten, and her to-do list had already spilled into tomorrow's hours. But how could she refuse? Mr. Carver's words, "I wouldn't trust anyone else," clung to her like a command. "Sure," she said with a forced smile, her voice steady even as her hands trembled. As he walked away, she glanced at the clock. Past lunch. Again. Her stomach growled, but she ignored it, diving back into her endless tasks. Later that evening, Rose arrived at her parents' house. Exhaustion clung to her like a second skin, but she smiled brightly as her mother enveloped her in a warm hug. "Rose, you're such a lifesaver. Your father and I are swamped planning the anniversary party. Could you take over the catering arrangements?" "Of course, Mom. I'll handle it," Rose replied, her voice soft but steady. Her brother, Mark, leaned back in his chair. "And while you're at it, can you edit my resume? I need it done by tomorrow." "Sure thing, Mark," she said, her tone unwavering even as resentment bubbled inside her. Did they even realize how much they were asking? As the family continued chatting, Rose's thoughts drifted. She pictured the painting shed started months ago, still sitting unfinished in the corner of her apartment. She thought about the graphic design class she'd dreamed of enrolling in, the one she'd put off yet again. When would it be her turn? By night that same day, Rose sat at her desk, her laptop glowing in the dimly lit room. Her fingers moved mechanically as she typed out the reports for her boss. A familiar ping broke the silence. Amanda again. "Hey, don't forget about the gift tomorrow. Thanks, love you." Rose leaned back in her chair, staring at the message. Did Amanda really love her, or just what Rose could do for her? Her gaze shifted to the dusty canvas leaning against the wall. It had been over a year since she'd painted anything. Once, art had been her escape, her joy. Now, it was just another reminder of how little space she had left for herself. "When was the last time I did something just for me?" she whispered. The question hung in the air, unanswered. Rose shook her head and returned to her laptop. There was no time for self-pity. Time blurred as Rose fell deeper into her routine. running errands for others, her shoulders slumping but her smile fixed in place. At work, colleagues cheerfully dumping responsibilities on her desk. Friends texting her at odd hours, confidence shed come through every time. Every yes chipped away at her energy, her dreams, her identity. She longed to push back, to say no, to reclaim the life that felt so far away. But the thought of disappointing anyone was unbearable. As Rose climbed into bed that night, her body ached with exhaustion. Her heart ached more. She stared at the ceiling, feeling the emptiness of a life spent living for everyone but herself. "All I ever wanted," she whispered into the darkness, "was to be liked." But deep down, a more haunting question loomed: what would happen if I stopped trying? The weight of expectations. Caption: the harder I tried, the more they asked. Rose's life felt like a well-rehearsed routine. Her constant effort to fulfill everyone's demands had become second nature. She thought, if I keep trying, they'll see how much I care. But the more she gave, the more they seemed to take, and the less they seemed to notice her struggles. It was Friday night, and Rose stood at the corner of a cozy downtown cafe, clutching her phone. She glanced at the time. 7:05 p.m. Amanda was late, but that wasn't unusual. Rose scrolled through her messages, rereading Amanda's earlier text, "Let's catch up tonight. It's been too long. 7 p.m. works, right?" She smiled faintly. Despite her exhaustion, she had juggled her day to make this work. She'd stayed up until midnight finishing her boss report so she could leave the office early and make it here. At 7:15 p.m., her phone buzzed. "Hey, Rose. I'm so sorry, but I have to cancel. Crazy day at work. Rain check?" The familiar sting of disappointment settled in Rose's chest. It wasn't the first time Amanda had canceled last minute. Her mind raced. Should she text back? Say something? A small, rebellious thought crept in. What if I told her how much I gave up just to be here? Instead, her fingers typed out, "No worries. I totally understand." But as she slipped her phone into her bag, a darker question surfaced. Why does she never do the same for me? The following Monday, Rose sat at her desk in the office, trying to focus on a spreadsheet, but her mind kept drifting back to Amanda's canceled plans. Her phone buzzed with a meeting reminder, and she sighed. It would be another long week. As if on cue, Mr. Carver appeared at her desk, holding a stack of folders. "Rose, can I talk to you for a second?" Her stomach sank. "I've got a big client presentation tomorrow," he said, placing the folders on her desk. "The numbers need to be triple-checked, and the design needs tweaking. I know this isn't your project, but you're the only one I can count on to get it right." She hesitated, the weight of his words pressing down on her. "When do you need this by?" "By the end of the day would be great," he said, smiling as if he'd done her a favor. Rose glanced at the clock. It was already 3 p.m. I have some other tasks I need to finish," she said tentatively. "You're amazing, Rose. I know you'll figure it out," he said, walking away without waiting for her answer. Her shoulders slumped as she stared at the towering pile of work. Was her competence a blessing, or a curse? The weekend arrived, and Rose found herself at her parents' house for a family gathering. The living room was loud with chatter as relatives exchanged stories. Rose sat quietly, clutching a mug of tea, waiting for a chance to speak. Finally, during a lull in the conversation, she cleared her throat. "I've been thinking about taking an evening course in graphic design," she said, her voice cautious but hopeful. "It's something I've always wanted to do." Her mother glanced up from her knitting. "Graphic design? That sounds interesting. But are you sure you'll have the time? You're already so busy helping everyone." Rose frowned. "I could make time. It's something I'm really passionate about." Her father chimed in, chuckling. Passion is nice, but practicality is better. You've always been so good at taking care of others, Rose. That's your gift. Exactly, her mother said with a smile. You're happiest when you're making others happy. Rose stared at them, her words frozen in her throat. She wanted to argue, to tell them how drained she felt, how much she longed for something of her own. But would they even understand? Instead, she forced a smile and nodded. You're probably right. But inside, a quiet voice screamed, when will my happiness matter? Back home that night, Rose sat on her couch, staring at the unopened notebook she had bought for her graphic design class. The weight of her interactions, from Amanda's casual dismissal to her boss' demands to her family's dismissal of her dreams, pressed down on her like a heavy blanket. She thought about Amanda's cancelled plans and Mr. Carver's unwavering expectation that she would handle everything. She remembered her mother's smile and her father's laugh, as though her dreams were an amusing side note to her real purpose. The harder she tried to meet everyone's expectations, the more they piled on her shoulders. Did anyone even see her as a person, or just as a resource to be used? Her hands trembled as she picked up the notebook. She opened it to the first blank page, her pencil hovering over the surface. Could she really start sketching? Or would someone else's demand pull her away again? Her phone buzzed, breaking the silence. She glanced at the screen. Rose, can you help with the PTA fundraiser this week? You're so good at organizing things. She sighed, her chest tightening. Another request. Another opportunity to say yes. But a small, defiant thought flickered in the back of her mind. What if I said no? Rose's pencil hovered over the notebook, her heart racing. For the first time, she hesitated, not because she didn't know what to draw, but because she didn't know if she could take the risk. Could she start living for herself? Could she handle the fallout if she stopped meeting their expectations? And then came the most terrifying question of all, what if they stopped liking me if I did? I reached the edge of my endurance. Rose's life had always felt like a precarious balancing act, but even she had limits. She had ignored the creeping exhaustion for weeks, brushing off the headaches and sleepless nights. It's nothing, she told herself. I'll rest when everything's done. But the demands never stopped, and neither did she. It started with a faint dizziness at her desk. Rose had been working late again, rushing to finalize a presentation while juggling requests from colleagues. She reached for her coffee cup, only to find it empty. Her vision blurred as the office lights seemed suddenly too bright. She barely noticed her coworker, Clara, approaching. Rose, can you review this proposal before tomorrow? I know it's short notice, but you're so thorough. Rose opened her mouth to respond, but the room spun violently. The next thing she knew, she was on the floor, voices muffled and distant around her. When she came to, she was in the break room, a cold compress on her forehead. You fainted, Clara said, her tone more concerned than Rose expected. You should go home. But Rose shook her head. I'm fine. I just need a minute. Clara hesitated. If you're sure. But don't forget the proposal. I'll email it to you. Even in her haze, Rose forced a weak smile. Of course. The next day, Rose woke up feeling worse. Her throat burned, her head throbbed, and her limbs felt like lead. She could barely sit up without feeling dizzy. Her phone buzzed incessantly on the nightstand. A text from her mom, can you pick up decorations for the party? Don't forget the catering menu. An email from Mr. Carver, the client loved the report. Can you prep another for next week? Great work. A voicemail from Amanda, hey, I need your help picking an outfit for my date tonight. Call me when you can.